What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So it looks like we have more twists and turns in the case of Jon Jones potentially facing Tom Aspinall. Now there's a lot of layers to this. The latest being that Jon Jones reportedly has said he will need 6 months, a full 6 months, completely unheard of, to train for the Tom Aspinall fight should he take that fight. Now, this is bad for many reasons. I think first and foremost, it's bad because it is, one of the biggest fights that the fans are really wanting to see. And my fear really is that ultimately, as the sport grows, as the popularity of the fighters grow, as their incomes and earning potential grow and expand, that the UFC is going to potentially become much like boxing, where these guys are demanding such a high amount that they can never get the deal done, and it's always a pissing contest between the fighter and the organization, which in this case would be the UFC. And unfortunately, those who really pay for that at the end of the day are the fans. Me, you, the fans of the sport, the ones who are not only keeping up their ESPN subscriptions simply for the fact that they watch the UFC. That's me, by the way. But that is my fear, because it is the fans that suffer when these fighters like Jon Jones become so big and they have so much money that they don't really need to fight, and to them it's kind of like, maybe I will, maybe I won't, whichever way the wind blows, and it's getting to the point where money is their main motivator, and it's not so much about legacy anymore. Or you could also argue that he's already created his legacy. He's already considered, and on a lot of people's lists, the pound-for-pound greatest, if not one of the pound-for-pound greatest. He's right up there, him, GSP. Now they're talking Islam Makhachev. Either way, point being, how bad does he really need it? And it seems like he's really playing the system, and he's doing it really badly. We already know Tom Aspinall wants to fight. With that said, Tom Aspinall kind of needs the fight for his legacy, right? Jon Jones is the guy that came before him. Jon Jones is the guy that has already achieved greatness and has already cemented himself as one of the greats in the sport, whereas Tom Aspinall is looking to achieve that, and he still has plenty to prove. He's already proved a lot, obviously, but he still has plenty to prove, and he wants to continue to prove that by fighting and defeating Jon Jones. But from Jon Jones' perspective, his legacy is already intact. He's already cemented himself as one of the greats, and in his mind, he doesn't need the money, he doesn't need the Tom Aspinall fight to secure his legacy, although some people would disagree with that. And I'm one of those people that's kind of straddling the fence a little bit, and I think to myself, well, if he doesn't fight Tom Aspinall, it's not like you're all of a sudden gonna say Jon Jones wasn't one of the greats. So it all depends on, it's all about perspective, and it's all about each person, each fan's opinion, but it's mostly about Jon Jones' perspective. If he's good with where he is, if he's good with what he's achieved, he's been the light heavyweight champion, he's now the heavyweight champion, right? And of course, there's a lot of people out there that will say, well, if he doesn't unify that belt, he's not really the champion. Now, the real question is, does Jon Jones give a shit about what you think about that? Seems like no. It seems like he doesn't care much about what the pundits believe what the hierarchy of the UFC believe, the brass as they call it, and what the fans think about his career, where he's at in his career, you know, whether he chooses to retire now and vacate the belt or unify the belt by facing Tom Aspinall. He's the one that really matters, because he's the one that either takes the fight or chooses to go ahead and retire, walk away from the sport, and does not take the fight, and we never get to see that fight. Now, that's one layer, okay? Another thing that's going on here, as I very femininely take a sip of my frappe through a straw as I discuss MMA. Nonetheless, you can drink through a straw and still like MMA, I promise. Anyway, we now have this layer of, I would say adds an extra layer of kind of convolution. Convolution, is that a word? It is now. It's become convoluted because ESPN and the UFC or Dana White are not very happy with one another right now. UFC 313, there was a lot of streaming issues that took place. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about this. Dana White and the UFC brass are pissed at ESPN because there were a lot of people that either couldn't buy the pay-per-view, just couldn't get the pay-per-view at all, or got the pay-per-view, but then they were having streaming issues. You know, everybody remember when, you know, Jake Paul and Mike Tyson, you know, fought on Netflix live and it pretty much broke Netflix. There were so many people trying to stream it. You know, something kind of along those lines, not the same but similar, happened UFC 313. So there's writing on the wall that UFC may not be dealing with ESPN anymore. Okay? The only reason I have ESPN is to watch MMA. So I'll be glad to let the subscription go and stop paying for it every month, because right now I'm paying for Netflix and I'm paying for ESPN. I'll be glad to just stop paying for ESPN and already have Netflix. Of course, you know, if there's no telling what kind of deal they may work out with Netflix, obviously there will still probably maybe will be the pay-per-view sort of model. If there's not a pay-per-view sort of model, if you're a person that wants to watch the UFC, perhaps you'll pay more yearly. Maybe there'll be like a, you know, your monthly subscription fee will be X amount higher than whatever just people who are wanting to stream movies and whatever. You know, I'm not sure how they'll do it, because there's talks as though the pay-per-view model is dead, because in return to this, ESPN is also pissed at the UFC, because the UFC signed with ESPN back in 2019, and according to ESPN, the UFC is not holding up their end of the bargain in terms of garnering the pay-per-view sales necessary to meet the terms of said contract that was signed between the UFC and ESPN. Okay? So this issue points to an issue of there's not enough stars in the UFC right now. There's not enough stars fighting regularly, okay, to bring all of those eyeballs. There's not enough compelling matchups that the UFC are actually able to ink on paper and then drive to the cage and lock them in the cage together. And what's worse is we've had several instances where one or the other is about to happen, and then Arman Tsarukyan, by example, didn't make the fight. Okay? You know, Justin Gaethje, Dan Hooker were supposed to appear on UFC 313 pay-per-view. Although that was not for a title, that's one of the reasons people were willing to pay for that. Part of their $80 was going to undoubtedly finally see Justin Gaethje and Dan Hooker lock horns when they've been both circling around each other and orbiting each other in the lightweight division for years, but have never actually faced each other. That's one of the reasons people were willing to pay the $80, aside from Alex Pereira and the Magomed fight, okay? Didn't happen. Dan Hooker got injured, had to pull out, right? We still had to pay the $80, but maybe a moderate number of people said, no, you know, fuck it. I'm not paying $80 just to watch, you know, Ankalaev hold Pereira up against the fence, which I know that's not what he did. He beat him fair and square. He put on a better all-around MMA mixed martial arts performance. But a lot of people prior were thinking that the way that Magomed Ankalaev was going to beat Pereira was absolutely by stifling his offense. That's the word I'm looking for. Stifling his offense by clinching him, grappling him, all that sort of thing. He actually ended up doing very little of that, which was quite impressive. But the threat of it was always there. And prior to the fight, a lot of people thought that's what he was going to do. And a lot of people said, well, damn, you know, I mean, I've already seen, granted, it was a great fight, but, you know, Fiziev, he's not even ranked in the top 10. I've already seen those guys fight, you know. A lot of people probably backed out of buying the pay-per-view because of that. So there's been stuff like that happen. Conor McGregor, they can't get him back in the octagon for nothing. You know, still, the biggest, most recognizable household name in MMA, they still can't get him into the freaking octagon for nothing in the world, right? And you have, you know, slightly lower level tier stars, you know, like Sean O'Malley, stuff like that, who, you know, are pretty popular. A lot of people like them. They have a fun style, but we're in this era right now, and I think it's really unfortunate. And I'm not sure exactly what the answer is, but we have all of these Russian, Dagestani stars. Well, not all of them Dagestani, but the Russian, Georgian, you know, we have an era, and out of all of them, which he's not even the champion anymore, Ilya is the only one that, Islam is, you know, pretty, to be fair, has a pretty good, exciting style for being a Dagestani fighter. Stand up is really good. Obviously, he's got the ground game to go along with that. But aside from him, Ilya is the one. You know, Ilya is the main one. Ankalaev, to be fair, he's not horrible to watch. You know, he's fairly fun to watch. Then you got Bilal at welterweight. Remember the decision, Bilal. You got Dricus du Plessis, which you know, he's one of the few that is not Russian born. You know, it's interesting because you have a lot of these Russian champions, and they are great fighters, really good at what they do, but they have been kind of dominating the top of these divisions for the past several years. And unfortunately, although they are great fighters, you don't have anyone that has really become a household name based on garnering fan interest. And that truly sums it up. That truly sums it up. Okay? And this is the reason that ESPN, you know, Dana White and them are saying that they're pissed off at ESPN because of the streaming issues, and ESPN's turning around and saying, hey, you ain't been hitting on much either ever since you hadn't been able to get Conor McGregor back into the octagon since 2021, you know, because you got this era of 2015, 2016, 17, 18, 19, you know, where Conor was in the mix. You had the Khabib, you know, Conor, you know, whole. I mean, it was exciting at that time. And as great as the Russian fighters are, you have no one that outside of the cage is making the average household person and or MMA fan be like, oh, this is must see TV. I gotta watch this. I gotta watch what this guy says in this press conference. I gotta watch what this guy's doing on his social media. I gotta watch what this guy's doing over here. I mean, you got some, don't get me wrong, Merab's fun, he's fun, but then his fighting style is not. It's not. A guy who ducks his head down, feints the takedown 673 times in a fight, never really takes you down. I mean, he has some in his, in his most recent fight against Umar. I mean, he feinted that 728 times, never actually really took him down because he didn't really have an advantage there over Nurmagomedov. Just tired him out, but then he didn't really do a lot on the feet, threw a few punches here and there. It's just not an exciting style to watch, and we're in this era where there's no Conor, right? And there's Alejandro Pantoja. Up from there, you got the Georgian, Merab Dvalishvili. Ilia Topuria. Whoa, there's a breath of fresh air. He's actually exciting. Well, he just vacated the belt. And now Islam at lightweight, where Ilia Topuria is moving up to, is shunning that fight. He doesn't want that fight. Then at welterweight, you got Bilal, remember the decision, Muhammad. Dricus, holding it down at middleweight. He's a pretty fun fighter. I mean, again, good fighter, entertaining to watch, but he's not the kind of guy that is this huge, massive star where people are going to watch. He's no Conor McGregor on the mic. Okay? He's no Conor McGregor on the mic. Dricus du Plessis is not throwing dollies through bus windows. And I know you're like, what are you doing, bro? You bigging him up because he's breaking the law? No, I'm not bigging him up. I mean, I'm a law-abiding citizen, but that's must-see TV then. Right? You're creating a story. You're creating a narrative. You're creating a conflict. And conflict sells fights. Pure and simple. Okay? You don't get that with Dricus. Fun fight style. But what kind of excitement, and except for the MMA purist and the true MMA fans, there's nobody watching Dricus. We all love him. I love him. I'm an MMA fan. You love him. You're an MMA fan. But Conor was the kind of fighter that had people who didn't even watch MMA knowing his name. Quick story, and then we're going to end it. And I know, like back in the day, Conor, when he fought Floyd Mayweather, you ever been around somebody who they're trying to talk MMA with you because they know you like MMA, but they're complete casual. Like they don't know anything about MMA. And you'll talk to them for like 30 seconds, and then they'll start naming the one or two fighters that they know, and it turns out that fighter retired 4 years ago, and you're like, oh, okay, all right, dude, yeah. Good talking with you, buddy. My nephew doesn't watch MMA, right? But I remember back in the day, him coming to me and talking to me about Conor McGregor. He knew about Conor McGregor. Doesn't watch a lick of MMA. Could give less than two shits about MMA. But he knew about Conor McGregor, right? They don't have anybody like that now. There is nobody like that now. And even Jon Jones, moving my way up the list. Dricus, good fighter, but he's not garnering any interest from the casual. Okay? He doesn't have an out-of-cage presence that gets people talking. Which in turn generates revenue for the UFC when it comes time for the fights themselves, the pay-per-views. Who's going to buy the pay-per-views? There's nobody invested other than the UFC fans themselves in Dricus du Plessis' performances, okay? Put it that way, all right? Then you going up to light heavyweight, there was Alex Pereira. He doesn't speak English, so he became quite a big star, you know, for being a guy that doesn't even speak English for an American-based company like the UFC. But now his aura's gone. You know, now people are remembering that, well, he actually got slept by Israel at middleweight. You know, he actually got taken to school. A lot of people thought Jan Blachowicz beat him in that fight, you know. And then he gets up against the first Dagestani fighter that's been, you know, that the UFC's been seemingly protecting him from ever since Pereira's been in the UFC, and now he loses. Now his aura is gone. And he didn't speak English, right? So now you got another Dagestani fighter holding it down at light heavyweight. Great fighter, don't get me wrong, nose to the grind, hard worker, but when he wins, he takes his little happy ass back to the mountains of Dagestan, and you don't see him again for another 4 months until he fights again. Not exactly a riveting story and narrative behind this guy, right? Moving on up to heavyweight, Jon Jones, one of the greatest ever. He's American. He speaks English. He's even got a little bit of shit going on in the outside world. You know, you catch him here being drunk, doing this, talking about, you know, putting fingers in guys' buttholes and all the rest of it. And like, some of you are probably like, what? Yeah, go look it up. Jon Jones drunk in a comedy club. You'll hear what I'm talking about. You know, he beats his wife, does cocaine, gets in accidents and leaves the scene of an accident. I mean, he's got all that, you know. Now again, I'm not condoning breaking the law, but these are the kind of things that make people who are not MMA fans go, yeah, what about that guy Jon Jones? Yeah, I heard about this. I heard about that. That's crazy that he's able to live that sort of lifestyle and still be as good as he is. Well, there's Jon Jones, but Jon Jones is fucking with everyone. He's fucking with everybody's minds. He's fucking with everybody's emotions. You know? MMA fans and casuals alike. Plus, he's fucking with the UFC. And he's really fucking with Tom Aspinall. Right? I mean, Tom Aspinall wants that fight like I want cookout watermelon milkshakes in June and July. You know? And the eggnog ones at Christmas. So we're at this place right now within the sport where the UFC's got a star problem. What's the star problem? They don't really have any. Not any that are really fighting or holding a belt right now that can really move the needle. Right? Because to move the needle on fight night, when it comes to pay-per-views, you also have to be a person that is privy to the entertainment aspect of fighting, and you have to be able to move the needle with antics prior to the fight and then antics post-fight. You have to be able to move the needle that way, right? And then that in turn helps to move the needle on the night of the fight, right? So Jon Jones is effing with us. Jon Jones is effing with everyone. I really, unfortunately, wonder if this fight will ever happen at this point. And I could seriously almost see Jon Jones just completely walking away. Because if he's going to need 6 months, total months, to train for a fight, and they haven't even signed the contract yet, at earliest, even if they sign the contract right now, you're not looking until September, October this year for that fight. And I don't even think they're close to signing it. You know, he's asking for an ungodly amount of money. I think he is... And then the UFC finds themselves in this situation where, I'm not going to say their business is struggling. You know, it's a strong business, but they are making their way off of the backs of these 12 and 12, 24 and 24. These fighters that aren't really making a whole lot of money. They are making their way off of the backs of these mid-tier fighters right now, because they don't have anyone that is just this super megastar. And it's gotten to a point where the sport and the fighters have become successful to a point where I believe it's actually hurting the sport some, right? Because these, you know, Dustin Poiriers and Connors and, you know, Jon Joneses and all these other guys who have made these huge names for themselves and have all this money now, I mean, they're, you know, they're not, Dana, I need a fight. Dana, I need a fight. You know, none of them are doing that. And I think that it's in turn hurting the sport. So, you know, this is just another antic by Jon Jones. Maybe in hindsight we'll look later and see that this is a genius move and that he does actually fight Tom Aspinall and he gets what he wants, the amount of money he wants for it. But after hearing this, I have a pretty big concern that it's just not going to happen. And I also have a concern too that the UFC, especially being where they are with their contract with the ESPN and considering moving completely away from the pay-per-view model and going to like a Netflix sort of platform to do their fights, you know, I think they're going to be watching their money, and I think they're going to be watching what kind of moves they make, and I don't know if they're going to be willing to make the sort of concessions monetarily that Jon Jones is really asking for and pushing them to make. I just don't know if they're going to do it right now. I just don't know if they're going to do it right now. They don't have any big stars right now that are just making them a shit ton of money hand over fist. They just don't have it. You know, and here's Jon Jones asking for probably $20-30 million. And two, I think they're scared to do it because anytime you have a fighter that does that and sets that sort of bar and that sort of precedent, anyone that comes after them that garners any sort of even relatively close success starts coming to you and saying, well, Jon Jones did it. You know, the whole Conor McGregor Floyd Mayweather thing, they did it. They made a shit ton of money. Dana made a shit ton of money. Conor made a shit ton of money. Obviously, Floyd made a shit ton of money. But then after that, I think Dana was kind of a little taken off guard and upset about the subsequent request from fighters to do that exact same thing. You know, and him agreeing to do that kind of gave off the idea to the rest of these fighters that, oh, we're in the business of doing these crossover events, when in actuality it was a one-off for Dana. He didn't want to do that. You know, he was just doing it in that one special circumstance, right? And I think now you see what happened. You know, that made Conor so much effing money that he was able to build other businesses with it. He's able to be, now he's this self-made multi-millionaire who could give two shits if he ever steps in an octagon for $10 million again. You know, and then re-injure a leg that has been literally cracked in half and he has a titanium shin bone in it. You know, and so in a way they kind of created a monster, and now they're having trouble capitalizing on any revenue off of the Conor McGregor name because he's become so effing big and because he had the injury. You know, so it's just kind of this perfect storm right now where Jon Jones wants, but the UFC, I don't know if they're going to be willing to give and give and give and give. I just don't know if they are. And because of that, I have a fear that this fight will never happen, that Jon Jones is happy where his career is, and he will slowly vacate the belt and will slowly ride off into the sunset after having vacated the belt. And, you know, they'll be putting somebody else in there to, you know, the Tom Aspinall will have to fight another heavyweight, you know, to see who the champion is going to be. I don't know. It's a crazy time that we are. But anyway, subscribe to the channel if you would. Like the video, comment down below, let me know what you guys think. Will Jon Jones fight Tom Aspinall? Is it ever going to happen? Is the UFC going to stay with ESPN? Will they be able to work something out? Or do you see them moving away from a pay-per-view model into like a live streaming platform like Netflix? Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you on the next one.